Hello students, welcome back to our Life Science classes for grade 12. Today we will be looking at questions and answers based on DNA profiling, which we discussed in our previous lesson. So let's look at a typical exam type question. Question 1. Study the diagram below showing the following DNA profiles: the blood of a raped female victim, the blood of 3 suspects, semen found on the female victim. So if you look at our DNA profile, you can see the various labels. When we are discussing the answers, we will analyze that diagram a little more closely. The questions based on these DNA profiles are the following. 1.1, which suspect was most likely the rapist? 1.2, explain your answer in question 1.1. 1.3, give one reason why this evidence may be considered reliable. 1.4, give 2 reasons why this evidence may not be considered reliable. I know those seem contradictory, but we'll look at that. 1.5, name 2 benefits of DNA profiling other than for solving crimes. Question 2, which is also from a past exam paper. It says the questions below are based on DNA profiles. 2.1, what is DNA profiling? 2.2, DNA evidence of a murder suspect was found at the scene of a crime. Give 2 possible reasons why the suspect might be found not guilty in court by referring to the DNA evidence. Now you would find some answers overlap with answers in question 1.1, but we are using them because these are typical exam type questions. So let's go back to our question 1 and analyze the diagram. Remember we said whatever is written at the stem before your actual questions come up is really important information. So you must make sure you read that carefully, right? So if we analyze our diagram, the first sample, the first DNA profile that you are looking at is from the semen sample, which would have been found on the victim. If you look at the blood samples, the DNA profile of the victim is indicated. This is important. There's suspect 1, suspect 2, and suspect 3, right? And it says DNA profiles compiled by forensic scientists. So let's look at 1.1. Which suspect was most likely the rapist? So remind yourself, what are we going to look for? The rapist DNA profile should match the DNA profile of the semen sample, right? So let's look for that. So look carefully, look at which ones are a perfect match, where every black bar is going to match the semen sample. And if you look carefully, you find that is suspect 3. Question 1.2 says explain your answer to question 1.1. And notice it's 2 marks. We've spoken about this before. Where a question asks you to explain, you are not merely giving a reason, or you're not merely stating a fact, you're giving the reason behind the fact as well, right? So why are we saying that suspect 3 is the rapist in question 1.1? The reason is the following, and choose your words carefully and make sure that your answer is detailed and accurate. The reason is the following. The black bars on the DNA profile from the suspect match the black bars on the DNA profile of the semen sample. That is your answer. Sometimes we are tempted to merely say the DNA profile of one matches the DNA profile of the other. But in recent exams where we have discussed final exam questions, it's important, it was brought to our attention that you need to talk about the black bars on the DNA profile, right? So remember, use the words, the black bars on the DNA profile of the one matching the black bars on the DNA profile of the other, right? Let's look at question 1.3. Give one reason why this evidence may be considered reliable. That's because the DNA profile of each individual is unique. So when you look at a DNA profile, it generally could only have come from one individual. I say generally because you can have an exception like identical twins. Right, 1.4. Give two reasons why the evidence may not be considered reliable. Now, this is a criminal case, and in a court of law, there are certain standards that must be met. So merely saying, this is a sample found at the crime scene, and therefore that should lead to a conviction. So what are some reasons that could be given for saying this is not good enough to convict an individual? One could be that individual could have an identical twin with the same DNA. Another reason could be there may have been human error in obtaining the DNA profile. In a laboratory, you could have had unreliable testing methods or methods of compiling the profile that were actually used. Another scenario could be that evidence of the suspect was planted at the crime scene. Another could be that the DNA was present at the crime scene before the crime actually took place. Right, so those are some possibilities that you could give. Question 1.5. Name two benefits of DNA profiling other than solving crimes. Now remember, DNA profiles are used for identification. So you must ask yourself, apart from identifying criminals, who else can be identified using DNA profiles? Relatives could be identified. Perhaps siblings were separated at birth and they want to know when they meet years later, am I closely related to this individual? DNA profiles would indicate that. In paternity cases that may be disputed, where a woman may say, this particular man is the father of my child, and that man may dispute it and say, no, I think somebody else is the biological father of the child. A DNA profile will be conclusive. Remember, in this case, a child's DNA profile would be made up of the mother's DNA plus the father's. So you would find when you look at a child's DNA profile, half of the black bars in that profile would be from the mother, and half the black bars would match the father's DNA profile. So that's something to bear in mind. Right, and also this can be used for identifying dead bodies. Perhaps they are unclaimed bodies, and maybe the bodies are in a great state of decomposition where they can't be identified visually. So DNA profiles can be produced in order to identify that body. In addition, we mentioned that DNA profiles can be used to diagnose inherited genetic disorders. This could be in an unborn child or in a newborn baby, right? So that is question 1.5. Let's look at question 2. Question 2 says, 2.1, what is DNA profiling? DNA profiling is a process of producing a pattern of black bars that represent a DNA fragment from an individual. Remember, it's not the entire DNA that is analyzed. there are particular fragments that can identify individuals. Right, students, let's look at the next question 3. We have a diagram showing you DNA profiles again. The diagram below shows the DNA profiles of 6 members of a family. The greater the similarity in the position of the bands in the DNA profiles of different individuals, the more closely they are related. The parents, Zinhle and Ayanda, have 4 children. 2 of the children are their biological offspring, and the other 2 children are adopted. So you can see the 6 DNA profiles, you can see the names of the parents, the names of the 4 children. The question is, which are the 2 adopted children of Zinhle and Ayanda? And your options are given, right? If you look at them, A says Litswe and Bandile, B says Lindiwe and Gugu, C is Bandile and Lindiwe, and D is Gugu and Litswe. Combinations. So let's go back and look at our answers. Right, students, so let's look at our question 3 and let us analyze this particular diagram. Right, remember what we want to know is which of the 2 children are adopted. Remember, a child inherits half its DNA from one parent and half the DNA from the other parent. So when you look at the DNA profile of a child, that DNA profile would have half the bands on the profile that match with the bands of the mother, and the other half of the bands on the DNA profile that match with the bands of the father's DNA profile. Right? So that's what we're looking for. Those would be the biological kids. If we find that there are children who are adopted, not biological children of those parents, then we wouldn't get that kind of matching of bands. So let's look closely, right? So let's look at Zinhle, the mother, and Ayanda, the father. You can see their patterns. And let's look at the first child, Lindiwe. And let's look at each of those bands from top to bottom.
We need to learn to live with the COVID virus, you know, the new normal, at least for the next few months. And we have just what you need to make sure you never miss a single school lesson. And it's absolutely free, mahala! High quality, powerful, animated lessons for all your subjects. So don't spend a cent until you have tried Iwis. It's everything you need. All video lessons, textbooks, workbooks, exam prep. We want you to ace 2021.